Okay, now we in this for that first little section we had a Gilded Age, American Transition, and we had a Progressive Era. A lot of domestic issues, stuff happening within the borders of the United States. This next unit, we actually switched to foreign issues, international issues for the history of the United States, and it is still roughly the same time period. Just keep in mind that's what happens. Like people often forget when we're teaching history that you have issues inside the country and outside the country happening at the same time, just like you do now. So now let's switch to the international issues. And this 1898 to 1914, we're going to see America rise as a world power. Now, those times, this is the beginning. We're talking War of 1898, also Spanish-American War, which is pretty much this entire presentation. 1914 is the start of World War One, and then that's actually going to go. Once we get 1914, we'll switch gears, and that goes into a whole nother presentation that we'll do next. But for right now, let's go and talk about America's rise as a world power. So it all really starts with Spanish-American War. Now, War of 1898 or Spanish-American War, it's been called either one. Um, if you really want to make sure you always know it, I would just call it the 1898 Spanish-American War. And it'll help you understand, remember when it took place and exactly who was involved. By your guess, you should know it involves Spain and America, but it's never fought in Spain or in America. It's actually fought in Spain's territories or colonies that still exist at that time, even as early as 1898. And it all really starts essentially with Cuba. And if you want to look into details of this, the backstory, America just put a tariff on sugar, and Cuba had already been struggling. It was a colony of Spain. Most people worked on sugar plantations. When America itself had put a tariff on sugar from other countries, Cuba lost a huge customer, that being the United States. Cuba is only 90 miles from the coast of Florida, from Florida Keys. So once they lost a huge customer, their market and their economy went down. People couldn't find jobs. Cuba got worse and worse. And there was a lot of unrest in Cuba, particularly with the way the Cubans were being treated by the colonizers, Spain. At this point, Spain has still grasping colonies around the world, very few. If you guys remember a couple hundred years ago, Spain was the empire of the world. They were huge dominance in North America, South America, and even other parts of the world. But at this point, they're like the old man on the block, like the old dog on the block. And America is this new young pup ready to make its name for itself. If you can imagine that metaphor when we talk about these two countries. Spain was dealing with a colony like Cuba of revolting against them consistently. Cubans aren't happy with life. They're really upset. Things are bad for them. The economy's bad. And most of them just work on these plantations. But the people who own these plantations are Spanish officials. They still have the whole system set up in Cuba. It got worse when there were less jobs because of the tariff on sugar. It got to a point as Cubans rebelled, there's not much Spain could do to them. They couldn't capture them. So what they ended up doing in a lot of areas was taking these villages where they knew some of these rebels were. They fenced off the entire village and starved these people out. Starved, like literally, children were starving. People were dying because they couldn't get out of the village because they were surrounded. It was almost a camp. They almost set up a camp around these cities, and that was how Spain dealt with the rebels. It's pretty harsh. Things take a turn for the worse as time goes on. People are more aware of what's going on, how the Spanish are treating Cubans. A couple of newspapers are fighting for subscribers and readers. Pulitzer's New York World and Randolph Hearst's New York Journal. These two newspapers are actually competing, trying to get more people to buy, subscribe to the newspapers. So when they start telling these stories, they start exaggerating quite a bit. Modern times, we call this fake news. Fake news has always been around, right? We like to say that. And it's when they take a subject and they stretch it a lot. Now it's always something similar to like, oh, did you hear Obama got a whole bunch of gifts from Saudi Arabia? Oh, wow. And in reality, all presidents get gifts and have to turn over to the National Archive, right? That's stretching the actual truth of the story. So fake news has happened for decades, right? The first time we actually see it really affect foreign policy is here and near 1898. We called it back then, they called it yellow journalism. Makes you know that. It's essentially exaggerated stories that they printed in the papers, especially what was happening to the Cubans. You can see pictures that are published by the starving children, men who are lined up and shot and killed from these two pictures here. Um, and the stories went on how Spanish soldiers were raping the women, torturing the Cubans. And people in the United States were upset. And like senators would go on the floor, and this is racist, and say, we have to do something for our little brown brothers to the south of us. We have to help them. Totally racist, right? But I guess they didn't intend it to sound that way. But nonetheless, that's really pushing America towards war. McKinley, the president at the time, is not real keen on it. He doesn't want to be the first one to fire shots. Obviously, he knows how this will look. So he kind of stands back, and people were demanding that he does something. You find political cartoons with this. They're telling McKinley, "Let Uncle Sam go. Let him go. Let the Navy go. Let's go get him." And McKinley plays it cool. Um, Another step to make it worse was the Delome Delome letter. That was a Spanish ambassador who had sent letters to the Spanish officials, tell them, "Hey, don't worry about the Americans. Like whatever, like all the people were upset. They're stirring up trouble. Don't worry about them. Their president's weak. He won't do anything. McKinley's weak. He was not going to do anything." Well, these letters are discovered and published for America to see. And one thing Americans don't like is when call our president weak. And McKinley didn't either. So McKinley decides, all right, I'm going to show some force here. Not going to attack, not going to destroy because you said some words. But what I am going to do is send the USS Maine, a ship, U.S. Navy naval ship, and park it off the coast of Cuba, particularly close to Havana, Cuba. You guys ever heard of it? Um, and from there, we're just going to like just show them that, hey, don't mess with us. We've got big guns, big ships. Don't mess with us. It was just a sign of force. But what ends up happening actually is the USS Maine will actually be sunk and destroyed. That's this picture here. Immediately, everybody blames the Spanish government. They set up mines in the water that when the boats came, an explosion happened and destroyed or torpedoed. All kinds of ideas about how Spanish did this, and this is really going to push it to the brink of war. McKinley will then ask for a declaration of war because of the USS Maine. So some of this stuff is just a consistent like background, like yellow journalism. It was building tension. It's making it worse and worse. The Delome letter that made it worse. The spark that started the Spanish-American War, like this event happened, war was declared. It's the USS Maine. It's exploding off the coast of Havana. And just so you show you some ideas how the Spanish are perceived in America at this time. Here in this one particular cartoon, you'll see Spain. They are brutes, barbarians, uncivilized, right? There is the sword where they murdered or killed somebody, and we know it's actually the main sailors murdered by Spain. There's a tombstone. He's stepping on the American flag, murdered by Spain. These are all American sailors that were killed by Spain. This whole idea, this concept of showing foreign countries, people as brutes and ape-like savages, is actually pretty standard with American history. Later on, a lot of people like to point out how racist America was with the Japanese during World War II. You can go far back to World War I, and it's actually pretty common for every country to show the opposite, their enemies, as brutes and uncivilized, and that's why we have to fight them. They have it figured out. They're like cavemen, you know. So that concept actually is pretty prevalent through all wars and all propaganda in American history. Here's another one right here. You have Spain as like the evil bad guy. Dun, dun, dun. You have Cuba asking for help. She's a maiden in distress. She needs help. And here's the hero, the United States, to save the day. Okay, so you can clearly see how people felt back home about this. They were definitely behind this idea of going to war with Spain. So real quick, the Spanish-American War will be actually pretty quick itself. The first fighting after war is declared actually doesn't take place in Cuba at all. It's actually way over here in the Philippines. See, Spain owned several colonies throughout the world. and the Philippines was one of them. And it turns out that when things were brewing up and getting really bad between America and Spain, the Secretary of the Navy at the time was Theodore Roosevelt. He's actually Assistant Secretary of the Navy. The Secretary of the Navy himself was pretty much not around ever. He wasn't doing a very good job. But Assistant Secretary was Theodore Roosevelt. And Theodore Roosevelt actually was like, hey, just in case something happens, I want to have U.S. ships right outside the Philippine Islands. So before war was actually declared, Theodore Roosevelt had already sent a majority chunk of the Navy in the Pacific Ocean from California out to the Philippines, which is right here in Asia near China, if you didn't know that. And in doing so, when war was declared, America was already there and started attacking the Philippines, the Spanish Navy on the outskirts of Philippines. The Philippines themselves are attacked. And actually, the United States had to wait for soldiers to get there. Like the Navy had done such a good job, it took them a little bit to get soldiers actually there to conquer the island itself. Once we get there, once Americans get there, the Philippine people are excited. They For them, they're thankful. Americans have come to liberate them and give them freedom. And the Philippine people actually fought side by side American soldiers to finish up the Spanish that were in the Philippines controlling the Philippine people. So it was really Spanish versus the United States and the Philippine people. Philippine people welcomed the United States with open arms. To the Philippine people, the United States were liberators. They thought the United States would treat them just like the United States did against England, give them independence. They didn't think the United States would try to control them. We'll come back to that in a second. So when we talk about Spanish-American War, part of it was fought in Pacific, over here in Asia, technically, Philippines, and it's done really early, right? The fleet's destroyed by May 1st. Manila, the capital, Philippines, surrenders by August 13th. You got a summer war, and it's over on that side of the world just like that. So that's the Philippines and Pacific. That's how simple and easy that part of it is. Now, the next place that the war is fought is actually in Cuba, right? Where everything counted for the most. And that's where we're going to go back to in just a second. So I told you about the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, a guy named Theodore Roosevelt, his decision to set up the major chunk of the Navy over there just in case they need to invade the Philippines. Well, once war is declared, Theodore Roosevelt decides, hey, I'm not going to be sitting behind a desk during a war. I'm not going to mess out in action. And he's going to quit. He's going to quit the war. He's going to quit Secretary of the Navy, get a position with the Army with a volunteer force. They're going to give him a high command, or a little bit of high command over one force. And he's going to raise a volunteer force called the Rough Riders. Okay, make sure you know that the Rough Riders. What's interesting about Theodore Roosevelt is his background. And I'm trying to do it brief and quickly here, but Theodore Roosevelt he grew up as a young kid, very sickly, wore the thick glasses. As he grew up, he was not very good at being outside. He was not an outside kid at all. His father eventually got sick of it. One day, tossed him outside as a little boy. So you're staying outside until nighttime. Theodore Roosevelt did that. And then next day, same thing. Eventually, Theodore Roosevelt was forced to deal with outside, forced to live outside, ended up loving it. This guy became such a big camping fan and hunting. He was a big outdoorsman. This was Theodore Roosevelt. He grew up actually loving it, enjoying it. That's why in the last section we talk about Theodore Roosevelt, really is responsible for conservation and eventually the National Park Service would be created because of him. He loved nature himself and found beauty in it. That's Theodore Roosevelt. Now, between being a boy and Theodore Roosevelt, now a lot happened, and some of it was sad. At one point, he was a New York legislator. He was a representative for New York State of New York, and his wife is about to give birth. He's got a two-story home in New York. His wife gives birth on the first floor, and his wife will die giving birth to their child. And just a few hours later, upstairs, Theodore Roosevelt's mother dies as well. This actually affects Theodore Roosevelt so much, he is going to give his child to his sister and ask her to raise the baby, and he will leave New York, and he'll go out to the frontier. And when he left, people thought he was crazy. He's a city guy going out to the frontier. He's not going to make it. He goes out to Montana area. Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Dakotas area. He is going to buy a ranch, hire people, and people think, wow, this guy's not going to last long. He's a city slicker. What is he going to do out here in the country? And Theodore Roosevelt proved himself to them, was very successful, quite successful, as a matter of fact. He'll eventually go back to New York and work through the Navy, work his way up, and become Assistant Secretary of Navy. But he made a lasting impression on those people in the frontier. They were impressed by him, to say the very least. Well, so when Theodore Roosevelt calls up for a volunteer force of Rough Riders, you'll have all sorts of people. You have politicians, he knows, because politicians know if I'm a war hero, that's going to help me get elected to office even higher up. So everybody wants to be a war hero just to get elected to political office. He's got those frontiersmen that are ready to join him and fight with him for the country. He'll go south from the Great Plains. When he's recruiting these Rough Riders, he actually goes south at one point. He's in San Antonio. If you guys ever heard of the Minger Hotel, real close to Alamo, in San Antonio, still there today. It's well known because that's where the Rough Riders met. And so you had people coming from like criminals, bandits from out west that were trying to get away from local law enforcement of that state or that area. Would go join Teddy Roosevelt as a Rough Rider. They would meet up in San Antonio and join him. The Minger Hotel to this day has glass cases of preserved uniforms of Rough Riders and everything. And even the rooms are preserved since Teddy Roosevelt stayed there. Other presidents have stayed there. And it's a historical gym in the middle of San Antonio. A lot of people don't know about the Minger Hotel. But the Rough Riders were a group of voluntary force of criminals, cowboys, ranchers, political friends and foes of Roosevelt, ready to make a name for ourselves and fight for America and Cuba. They're getting ready to go to Cuba. There's actually so many of them that when they actually get to Florida to head over to Cuba, half of them have to leave their horses behind because there's no room for them. So it's actually pretty impressive the number of people he gets to sign up to fight as Rough Riders, nonetheless. And that you shouldn't be surprised that this is Teddy Roosevelt. They do have the battle at San Juan Hill in Cuba. Don't get confused, because I know if you're thinking of San Juan, you might be thinking of Puerto Rico. But San Juan Hill is actually in Cuba. That's a famous battle where Teddy Roosevelt will lead the Rough Riders and defeat Spanish forces. In the end, like I said earlier, Spain is the old dog. They've got old weapons. They're not up to date, not being reliable. I mean, the uniforms are pretty old. Spain was pretty much falling apart, and they knew it. And America knew that. But Spain just couldn't just give up immediately, and they put up a fight despite how poor it is. By the way, sidestep, if you read the stuff about Teddy Roosevelt, what he wrote in his books later, he said that only way that was possible because of what the Buffalo soldiers did at a nearby battle by drawing away Spanish forces. Buffalo soldiers were units of United States cavalry after the Civil War who were all African American. They earned the nickname Buffalo soldiers. Armed forces were still segregated back then, and so they fought separately. But Teddy Roosevelt always acknowledged how helpful that they were in this campaign in Cuba. Once they defeat the force at San Juan Hill in Cuba, Navy bombards Guantanamo Bay, and they would take control of Guantanamo Bay. That becomes a famous place throughout history, even for you guys in your generation would know this one. And pretty much after that, it's over. If you take a look at this map, I'm zooming in here a little bit, you'll see that some forces would then travel to Puerto Rico, which was under Cuban control, and march in Puerto Rico and take over Puerto Rico as well. Puerto Rico was different. There wasn't much fighting. A couple of years ago when I went to Puerto Rico, we went to the forts where we saw and talked about some historical significance of the forts, some of the oldest forts you've ever seen from Spanish colonial times. And they talked about the invasion, the American invasion of Puerto Rico. And I took some students and they were just like, we never invaded any country. And to them, it was an invasion. And that's what it was. But Puerto Rico didn't put up much of a fight. They didn't suffer the same as Cuba did under Spanish rule. And so it didn't rebel as much as Cuba had. So there were a lot of Spanish soldiers in Puerto Rico. If you get a chance, I'm going to try to link this. But you should definitely watch the Drunk History version of Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders. It's pretty hilarious. And just like that, the United States does wonders. Before 1898, the United States was just another country. It's hard to imagine, but the United States wasn't always a huge world power. In modern times, you guys are growing up at a period where the United States is a superpower. It's one of the strongest, greatest countries in the world, if not, right? I mean, you can compare us to maybe Russia and China, and we're arguing about these super big powers controlling the world. this point in time, the United States was no different than Mexico, no different than Canada. It was just another country. But because of this Spanish-American War in 1898, things change. America is going to take control of Cuba, and we'll get more into that later. They take control of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico was always considered like a lighthouse, like a guarding station, because it's the first island coming into the Caribbeans. It's the first island coming into our half of the world, so it was kind of like a watch. So Puerto Rico was easy. It was a good reason to have, a good thing, good location to have. So the United States are going to take control of Cuba, Puerto Rico, and also the Philippines. And along the way in the next decade, these are what we get from the actual Spanish-American War. We're going to get other islands along the way out here, and we'll talk more about them in this section actually. But this is the beginning. The Spanish-American War changed everything for America because we became a world power. After Spanish-American War, we have territories now all over the world. We are a world power. Before that, we were just another country. But just keep in mind, Spanish-American War led to Cuba, Puerto Rico, Philippines, and Guam. These are just some of the islands we get during this time period, but this was the beginning of us as a world power. We had colonies all over the world, coast, not just coast to coast anymore. Manifest Destiny had expanded, right? So those are the countries that Spain gave up. It was a Treaty of Paris, in case you were wondering, but there's so many treaties of Paris that we never really asked that. But Spain had agreed to give up those colonies after defeating the Philippines and after defeating Cuba. Spain finally let it go and realized, like, we just can't do this. We can't hold on to these anymore. So what do we do with these islands, right? Because you're thinking, hey, we beat them, we got these islands from them, they're ours now. But do they become states? Do they become territories? Do we give these people their freedom? Because that's what they want in the first place. They want a self-government. You know, can we control them the same way Great Britain tried to control us? Is that hypocritical? Is that right or wrong? And so that's what the debate came to immediately after the Spanish-American War. So what do we do with these countries? And as many Americans, they believe we should annex these new countries and make them part of the U.S. Either states or territories, they should be ours. Those people that believe that America should expand an empire, we will call imperialists. That word should be familiar throughout world history. Those that wanted America to have an empire across the world, we call it imperialist. Now you see some of these cartoons, right? Imperialism. This is the United States. This is a hand. It's obviously a poker, right? This is called a Royal Straight in poker. It's one of the better hands, one of the best hands you can have. And this is our hand we're playing in the world. This is imperialism, American imperialism, right? The Caribbean island, the Philippines we have, the Virgin Islands we'll get later. We don't talk about that much. Cuba we control, and eventually even Japan we'll have an influence there. But we talk about that later. But this is imperialism. So you can see this is the United States holding the cards, right? This is the hand we're dealt. We're doing pretty good. Here's an interesting one. Uncle Sam representing America. He's already got we're already California, the Gadsden Purchase, the Louisiana Purchase, Florida, Texas, all of those areas we've acquired over time. This is the clothing that Uncle Sam had. This is what he was made of. But now we got all this new fabric. You know, we had Guam, Puerto Rico, the Philippines from the Spanish-American War. We're gonna get other stuff too. We'll get Alaska, Hawaii, Samoan Islands. We'll buy them actually from Germany. Take Hawaii and buy Alaska too. But these are the new material fabric, right, for a new suit. And the tailor measuring Uncle Sam for a new suit is none other than President McKinley, as he expanded American borders and captured more. So these are imperialists, right? Now, just like they're imperialists, there are people going to be against imperialism, right? And before we get to those against imperialism, American imperialism had very good reasoning for supporting this idea. All right, first, need for raw materials. Raw material, we think of raw materials in our history as cotton, but it's also oil, rubber trees from the Congo, the Belgian, we're all over that. Any natural resource you need, especially coal. At that point in time, coal was really important because the Navy ran on coal. Any raw materials. Back then, the idea was the only way you can get good, cheap, free raw materials was control another country that had the raw material. So raw materials were really important if you want to expand. and have colonies. Strategic reasons. This is really important. Think of it. The United States has a coal-operated navy, just like everybody else, coal-powered. It's impossible to take a coal-powered navy from the coast here and make it all the way to Asia. You have to refuel. You have to resupply. It's not just a 2-day journey. It's not a cruise ship, guys. This is 100 years ago. It takes quite a while to move these massive ships using coal power, and you have so many ships, right? So you've got resupply. It'd be really great if you could stop along the way and resupply like a gas station, right? Get more coal, get more food. Stop along the way again. Stop along the way again. Stop along the way again. You can easily make it over to the Philippines then. Okay, so that's also really, really great reason to have colonial expansion. That's why we need colonial expansion. That's why we need these other islands. It's a good reason to have them. Strategic reasoning. Another one is nationalism, which actually goes back to world history. This same period where Europe is grabbing up colonies everywhere, and because the idea was you're not really a power unless you control other people. It's sad, but that was a thought. Germany had just formed as a country, and they were grabbing as much land as they could, which caused Britain to go grab some more land. You've learned about this before in world history, but that was the concept of nationalism. Our country's the best. Let's show everybody by controlling more people. And the attitudes towards other people were incredibly racist. Um, the biggest thing here was that you've heard of spreading democracy, that concept. There were ideas that other places couldn't govern themselves, and they needed us to show them how to do it. There are other ideas that these other places, they were barbaric because their religion was different. And you know how religion is. If I am one religion, somebody else is a different religion, theirs is wrong. Theirs has to be wrong. Mine has to be right. I cannot let them exist with that other religion because then they're going to hell. I need to save them. That's my job. It's a religious thing, right? And that even includes like certain denominations, because Philippines were actually pretty much Catholic because Spain had been there so long. But majority of Americans didn't like Catholics, and you've heard this before. Some Americans believe Catholics aren't legitimate Christians, and vice versa, right? But so attitude towards other people that they're uncivilized, they can't do it themselves, so we have to take care of them. That becomes part of the reason for colonial expansion. And also, one I don't have on here, but it's worth discussing, is markets. Just think about that. Think about this concept, markets. We talked before how great the Transcontinental Railroad was for America because it opened up markets. Farmers now had markets all over. They sell to anybody all over the United States. Companies could now sell had national market to people all over the United States. Now, if we controlled, I don't know, the Philippines way over here, we're really close to 1 billion people here in China. And that's a lot of people we can sell to. So American companies are going to benefit greatly if we have territories close to other places, or if those territories themselves are national markets. Now we can sell clothing to all the way to China. We can sell weapons to these people. That's a pretty big deal. Markets are, I often forget to even mention that, but it's almost common sense. New places lead to new markets, new consumers, which is great for us as we produce things and need to sell to more people. All right, the bottom part here, you better know this. This man right here is Alfred T. Mahon. Here's a good picture of the old admiral. He wrote the influence of sea power on history. His book was read by Theodore Roosevelt when he was president. He was widely respected, and he made the best arguments as to why we need to expand our empire overseas. One, we need a powerful navy. Every strong country has a powerful navy, and you know this. Think about it. Spanish Armada, and then the British. When the British had their rise, they have a really strong navy. Every strong country has to have a strong navy. We need naval bases all over the world, and part of that is that strategic reasoning I talked about. Fueling stations for army bases, like the Navy. The Navy, if they're gonna go from island to island, or if they go coast to another coast, another continent, they need to stop, refuel, resupply. But also, if we want to attack, say, China, it would take us forever to get all the way from the United States, even if we hopped along the way to get to China. But if we actually already have some soldiers in the Philippines and our Navy in the Philippines, we can attack immediately. Technically, that's how we beat the Philippines so easy. We had guys in Hong Kong ready to go. So bases all over for refueling and to attack other places. That's why a strong Navy is needed. Now, the last thing he argues is actually for a canal to connect the oceans. All right, a canal to connect the oceans. You see, United States at this point in time, if we had naval ships on this side of the United States and we wanted to get to this side, Pacific to Atlantic, we had to go 13,000 miles all the way down South America and back up. He argues that there needs to be a canal cut somewhere here in the middle of America, and that canal would decrease the mileage to 5,000. You would go from 13,000 to 5,000 nautical miles, literally twice as fast, if not sooner, right? If you want a strong Navy, that's what you need. Because, or else you're going to really have one Navy over here and another one over here. They're never going to be able to work together because it takes too long to actually get back and forth. So this is Alfred T. Mahon's influence of sea power in history. These are the three ideas that he pushes why what we need to be a successful country. And guys like Theodore Roosevelt read this, and most people would agree. They're like, nailed it. He's right. This is how we become a bigger, stronger country. Now, there are anti-imperialists, people who are against colonial rule of others, people who said this is wrong, you can't do this. Guys like Mark Twain and Andrew Carnegie, we talked about, they're just perfect examples. And I like to use them because people don't think of Mark Twain as being very political, but he very much was. Andrew Carnegie, the same guy who got wealthy off other people working very hard, also believed it was wrong to try to control another people. And they would cite things like, hey, the Declaration of Independence, right? Us and British were doing the same thing, and we shouldn't do that. So they had very bad arguments, and you see political cartoons sometimes show that. Um, this is Great Britain, and this is America, and you can see that we are marching, or we're carrying our peoples, the colonies that we controlled. America over here, we have Cuba, and the Philippines as well. Great Britain, based real quick in their history, they have some in India, Pakistan. They even have China, parts of China they control. We're carrying them and doing them a favor. We're getting them over to civilization, us colonizers, if you will. And we're getting over all the ignorance for them. We're carrying them over all the oppression, all the brutality and superstition, cannibalism and slavery, right? Barbarianism, right? That's how we view these people. And it's our job to get them over. Okay, this isn't talked on about a STAAR test, but this is often referred to as a white man's burden. This whole concept that Europeans and Americans had was, it's our job to go in there and help them. They can't help themselves, and that's pretty much pretty clear by this, despite the fact that we're hypocritical in this. For instance, superstition for Americans, superstition was their religion. We call it their religion superstitious. It wasn't actually real religion. Slavery is obviously hypocritical of the United States to ever say anything about that, right? And cannibalism is a myth. Few people follow cannibalism, but nonetheless, that was a concept that anti-imperialists said. Like, this is a white man's burden. We don't need to do this. People can take care of themselves. And then the imperialists would argue, no, no, no. This is what we need to do. We need to help them help themselves. This is actually one of my favorite cartoons if you ever look this up, because it actually explains the hypocrisy of America at the time. And there's a lot going on that we can all summarize. This is the blurry version. I'm going to redo this eventually and set up the clear one. I have another PowerPoint that didn't get saved over here. But nonetheless, take a look. This is Uncle Sam, right? And this is like the lesson plan for new states or new U.S. territories. And it's Cuba, Puerto Rico, Philippines, and Guam, right? These are places we just got, right? All got that from Spanish-American War. And Uncle Sam's teaching him, say, hey, do what you're told, right? You're not used to sitting, but you're going to be disciplined. Do what you're told. We're going to teach you. And one day you'll be as good as these other guys. You can't see this, but this is like Tennessee, Arkansas, Alaska. This is all the states that we've taken and made good students. And we're going to say, we're going to make you just like them. Like, look at that class, right? But this actually shows the hypocrisy of America. Because actually over here, you have, it's really blurry, but you actually have a Chinese student who isn't even allowed into the school because of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. Talked about that. Native Americans are put out on their own. Their book is actually upside down. You can't tell that. This is actually the feathers supposed to represent Native Americans. They're on a reservation out on their own with less education, poor education, actually. That's why the book's upside down. And then who's actually doing all the cleaning and the grunt work here in the background? Or former slaves, the freedmen or African Americans at this point in history are just doing the cleaning, not getting an education at all. So when it says the title of this is actually School Begins, it shows you the hypocrisy of America in general. And we can actually go in more details if you actually look up the high def version of this. There's a lot written on the board, how they made the argument that we need to control these people like England controlled her colonies because they weren't ready yet. They needed us. We needed them and they needed us. So they took the opposite about this whole Declaration of Independence and said, oh, you had to be controlled some ways. So it's an interesting cartoon if you get a chance to actually look at it, a more clear version of it. It represents the hypocrisy of America at the time and actually does summarize a lot of what's going on at that time. So I already talked about this, but these are the four areas that come from the 1898 Spanish-American War. But here they are on an actual map to see how far it is. That's Spain. Spain still controls a little bit sliver of Africa, but Spain's going to give Puerto Rico to us. Guam and the Philippines, we're beginning our empire to spread out. Cuba is partial control, which we're going to talk about that in a second. We eventually get a whole bunch of other islands. So these are the from the Spanish-American War, which you need to know. But there are other ones we do get. We do get the American Samoa Islands. We'll pay for half of that. We'll actually get that from Germany. They take the other half. Hawaii will actually annex and just take over pretty much. Same thing with Midway and Wake Islands. And the whole point of this was we needed to expand out as far as we can, but we needed stops along the way. These are perfect, like, if you think of these like gas stations for Navy or Navy bases, that's exactly what they were. So real quick, how do we get Hawaii? Well, Hawaii is actually very sketchy how it's done. Hawaii still is native controlled. They're not even U.S. territory. We actually have American businessmen there because we have plantations there. One of those American businessmen is Dole. He is going to work to overthrow the native queen, Queen Luluio Kalani, which I'm saying that wrong because I'm not Hawaiian, so obviously. She was a native ruler at the time. Dole is going to overthrow her, and he does it using a small force. Technically, like this is not approved by the United States at all. So much that Dole will actually overthrow her so the U.S. can annex it. And he sends word to, at the time, it's 1887. So it was a while back, right? Before the Spanish-American War. Dole takes over and sends word to President Cleveland at the time that, hey, Hawaii is ready to be annexed by U.S. Technically, President Cleveland actually sets up a committee that finds that what Dole did was illegal and wrong, and he used American troops for this. He told them to do this. So Cleveland at first said, no, we're not annexing Hawaii. We're not going to do that. It was acquired by the wrong means. We don't support this at all. So Dole was technically a president of Hawaii. As he maintained control over the people there, he declared himself president. Now, after the Spanish-American War, McKinley is finally president, and McKinley was hesitant to do it as well. He was like, "Nah, I don't think we should do this. We can't do it." Politically, he was in a tight spot because the previous president had said no because it was wrong, and it was clearly out there that what you did was wrong. But after the Spanish-American War, Congress will ignore that, and Congress will actually annex and make Hawaii. That word "annex" again will make Hawaii officially part of the United States. And the first governor of Hawaii would also be Sanford B. Dole. If you recognize that name, Dole, his cousin starts the Dole Pineapple Corporation. And now most of you guys know the Dole for fruits, especially bananas. But that's actually his cousin, not him directly. But that's how we get Hawaii. Literally, just take it. Oh, this cartoon here actually shows you Hawaiian sugar, Cuban sugar, and U.S. sugar. There is a massive history behind the idea of sugar and sugar tariffs and how it led to this expansion as well. You should check out. But it's beyond the scope of this class, at least for introductory history class. Okay, so we're expanding. We've got from Spanish American War, we've got a few places. We just took Hawaii. Other places we're starting to expand and get out into is China. Now you're thinking, whoa, we never actually take over China. Difficult to explain, but there was what we call spheres of influence. This word here, spheres of influence, was areas where certain powers had special trading privileges. And you take a look at this map. I'm going to zoom in for you so you can see this. Countries, European countries especially, had come into China and try to take over, but they're really coming close to each other, and no one country had control of China, right? But they declared special areas where they did have control. The British said, this green area, we have special trading. This green area only trades with us, all the green areas. Japan had already been there, and Japan had this purple area and said, only this purple area only trade with us. Russia had come down and taken much of Mongolia, Manchuria as well, and said, you can only trade with us. The French had control over the orange and said, you can only trade with us. Germany in this brown area was late to the game, but they still wanted to join this idea of world power and said you could only trade with us in this brown area. Wasn't much left for the U.S. by the time the U.S. gets strong enough to actually do something. So the Secretary of State, which is in charge of foreign issues, John Hay, this man right here, is going to declare the open door policy with China. And it said that all of China is an open door to trade with the United States. Nobody can stop us. And now, if that sounds cocky, it should. It was incredibly cocky. I'm going to move over to the next slide and then come back. So hold on. Back, if you notice, there was a little bit here I wanted you guys to pay attention to. This is the Boxer Rebellion. If you're wondering why the Chinese didn't try to fight back with such a huge population, you're right, they did. At one point, these guys known as Boxers, mainly because most of them were experienced in martial arts, are going to start a revolution against all foreigners and Christians. The whole idea of Christianity since the Second Opium War being forced upon the Chinese, a lot of Chinese people had enough. And they would actually kill, if you look it up, they killed 32,000 Christian and foreigners in this uprising, and joined together to try to kick out all these foreigners of United States, France, Germany, Great Britain. And it got so big, such an overwhelming force, at one point, these rebels numbered 100,000 people. And they at this point, they thought they were just invincible, and they would go on to attack, and it would take a whole world force of soldiers to crush the rebellion. An international army, including the U.S., we sent 5,000 troops all the way there to crush that rebellion. So the Boxer Rebellion was their attempt to take back China from the foreigners, and it did fail. Over here, you can actually see, man, it's pretty blurry for you guys again. The open door policy that Uncle Sam opens. What's holding that door open? Our Army and Navy. It's holding the door open for us to trade with China and all these Chinese or Japanese and European guys are going to have to deal with it. We're using the United States Navy and Army to hold it open. That's exactly what the open door policy pretty much said, that United States holds a key to China. Americans going to trade with this. This is our policy now. That's how we're going to do it. If you guys don't like that, deal with it. And you got like countries like this guy represents Germany, Britain, Russia, France, and Japan here as well. All right, so it's the United States Navy and Army that's forced this whole concept of open door policy. So as the open door policy is enforced by the U.S. Navy specifically, U.S. Army and Navy specifically, the Navy's already been in the area. This is nothing new. So when we talk about 1898 Spanish-American War, changing America to war power, America's already been dibbling and sticking its foot out in the water to see how far it can go. And we can actually go all the way back to 1853 when Commodore Matthew Perry landed in Japan. And what he did there would change the course of history forever, without realizing it. He's going to establish a trade, Western trade with Japan and the United States. And essentially what Japan decided to do is between 1853 and 1890, by that time, Japan has adopted much of the Western ideology, and especially the economy as far as industry goes. This is Asia's first industrial power is Japan. So if you actually get a chance to watch The Last Samurai, although this doesn't take place during the specific time period we're talking about, it's talking about this event, or this time period after Civil War when Japan starts buying that American industrial military weapons like the Gatling gun and the cannon, and Japan goes from ancient samurai shogun code to industrial. And what that does is changes Japan so much that by 1905, Japan surprises the world, really, and they defeat Russia in the Russo-Japanese War. Little Japan, a small island nation, barely got the industry going, is going to beat a European power. The world was actually shocked by it. Russia was entirely embarrassed by this. Japan's navy had a large role to play in this defeat, and it's so bad that Russia will actually declare we'll fight to. They're going to fight to the very end. They're so upset, and embarrassed by this. It doesn't look like an end's going to come, but it's actually Teddy Roosevelt. By this time, he's actually president of the United States, and he's going to get both sides to settle down. And you'll see here, and he gets both to have peace. We have Russia and the Japanese and leaders there sit down at the Treaty of Portsmouth, and he'll get them to agree to a peace, and that will earn him a Nobel Peace Prize for doing so. Now, that's important for the state test. It's big. Treaty of Portsmouth is a big deal. Teddy is the first U.S. president to get a Nobel Peace Prize for this action. But you need to think of the long-term effects in history. When you think about it, without us doing this, Japan never would have been an industrial power, and they wouldn't have weaponized essentially. That's why when we talk about open door policy with China, nobody invades Japan because Japan is so awesome by 1905. You can't beat them. They're equivalent, if not better, than a lot of European nations. That's why they were actually invading. Actually, by 1910, Japan would actually invade Korea. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people think it happens in World War I. Japan has already been there for decades. World War II happens in 1930s. 1940s, Japan has actually expanded so far because they're so strong. This is why this plays a role in history. Japan will bomb Pearl Harbor. Everybody knows that. It starts us in World War II. But Japan bombed Pearl Harbor because we cut off oil to them, and we were number one supply of oil in the world. We cut off oil to them because Japan had industrialized and taken over and got so strong they took over so much land, especially around that one island chain that we just got in 1898, the Philippines, and we felt our territory, the Philippines, was threatened. So when we talk about this point in history, we're like, it doesn't seem that big. This is huge. Because even then, you're going to say, well, Japan would never have done that if we didn't land there in 1853 and start trading with them massively, especially weapons in the 1860s. So it's so amazing how these small things can have such adverse effect. Because once they bomb Pearl Harbor, we go into World War II, and Hitler declares war on us, and we go start fighting in Europe. If this had never happened, this time period here, who knows how World War II would have even occurred, or how different it may have been. Okay, so that's going to summarize Asia. In this chapter, we talk about rise of world power. We kind of shifted our degree. We went from the Spanish-American War to Hawaii, then over to Asia. Let's go back to the Caribbean real quick, because we do have to talk about another part of this. The Caribbean, this area, the Caribbean Sea, this is often seen in America's like back door, or our lake in our backyard, I guess you could say. It's more appropriate. At the very end of this is the island of Puerto Rico. You can see why many Americans feel like Puerto Rico is perfect for a lookout, right? Any nation coming from Europe has to pass by Puerto Rico. It's a good starting point. It's a good early warning system. It's a good base to set sail from. So Puerto Rico obviously was a good choice to keep. Okay, so that was our security. This is our backyard, so it's like our lake. We do have an economic interest in the Caribbean, especially when it comes to these sugar plantations, fruit plantations. There's a lot of money in sugar if you look at the history of sugar and how it changes Americans' history. But the biggest thing here is the need for a canal. That was huge. Where could we get it? Where that it wasn't. I know by now you guys know the Panama Canal. This is this country of Panama. There was times where we actually thought it'd be built actually here, and there were people suggesting that idea. Even now, if you look it up, there's some people that says we can still build another one here because this one's Panama Canal is outdated. We should work on this one now. So there's debate like then about where to do it. But essentially, we have a lot of reasons for interest in the Caribbean. Now, you're thinking, what about Cuba? What exactly happened with Cuba? Because it's not a territory or a state now. Well, Cuba was a bit more complicated. Before the Spanish-American War, there was an agreement among Congress that if Spain was defeated, Cuba would be given autonomy. We wouldn't control. Autonomy means you have self-government pretty much. After the war, it was heavily divided in the Senate. There's massive debates on this. The Philippines was the same way. Don't get me wrong. Philippines, it was by one vote. The Senate decided to annex the Philippines. Now, that was pretty close. But Cuba, the pledge, the promise was already there that we would not control them, so we had to get autonomy. But politics are politics. When it came down to it, we made them a protectorate, which is a fancy way of saying, we're going to take care of you guys. Don't worry, we got you. But you have to sign the Platt Amendment, which gave the U.S. a right to intervene in Cuba affairs at any time, which pretty much means we said, hey, you're free to be on your own, but anything we don't like, we can jump in whenever we like. All right, so that's how Cuba eventually becomes on its own, but not really on its own. Now, I just started talking about the canal, and Mahon in his influence World Power with his book. This was really important for him, and he made the point how important it was to have a canal. Real quick, again, look at this. You go from, and these numbers are so debatable. I've seen this before. This one being 13K, and this one being 5K. So don't freak out when graphs are weird like that. I wouldn't even worry about it. But nonetheless, it's obvious, right? 20 days from New York to San Francisco if you have a canal. 68 days if you have to go all the way around. That's huge at a point in time when we have a Navy, and you need a strong Navy. We would have to have two navies essentially if we didn't have a canal. We'd have to have a Pacific Navy and a Navy in the Atlantic. Like it would be like a European Navy and an Asian Navy. It'd be weird, and it would be very difficult for America's time. We needed this canal. Where can we put it? That was really big, really important. And remember, at this point in time, Teddy's our president, and Teddy read Mahon's book, The Influence of Sea Power, and he thought it was really important, and he agreed with it. Most people did. We needed a canal, but where to put it? Well, it came evident that Panama would be perfect. Now this is actually Panama. Here we have, at this point in time, it was all controlled as one country, and it was called Colombia. You may have heard of it. It's much smaller now. But Colombia controlled that whole area. Well, right there in Panama, there was a French company that got a contract from the Colombian government to build a canal. Okay, and for Colombian government, it would have been great, right? Colombia owned this whole land. They could charge people. It would have been great. That French company was the same one that built the Suez Canal in Africa, but the Suez Canal was a different story, much easier. This French company had given it a try. Thousands were dying from it, dying from disease, yellow fever there in the area. It was pretty horrible. And essentially, the French company gave up. We just can't do this. We're actually losing too many men. We can't do this. Also, Panama Canal is much different than Suez Canal. Suez Canal is level and even. Panama Canal acts as these locks where ships have to rise to certain levels and lower. It's not a flat route at all. It's pretty complicated. French company couldn't do it. So the French company sold the contract to the United States government. Great. The United States government has a contract from a French company. But the country of Colombia said, no, we're not going to allow you guys down here. We know how you Americans are. You come somewhere, you stay there, you don't get out. We don't want you down here. We don't like the Americans. And we don't want you controlling this. We want to have control of this. Well, Roosevelt contacts the people of Panama in this area. He says, you know what? You guys are your own people. You should revolt and leave Colombia. And Panama says, we can't do that. We're just a little bitty group of people. We can't beat this mighty Colombia. We're not ready for war. We don't want to go to war. We're not going to do it. So Theodore Roosevelt, in all his wiseness as president, sends a warships down to the coast here, and he says, hey, Colombia, Panama wants to be on their own. Look out your backyard. Take a look at our ships. If you got a problem with that, let me know. And Colombia says, all right, you, Panama, you can have your independence. Have at it. So Panama gets its independence, and they immediately grant us the contract and allow us to work. And the United States starts building a Panama Canal Zone, but we do it differently than that French company. One thing we found out is Walter Reed. You may have heard his name, Walter Reed Hospital, named after this guy. During the Spanish-American War, he had discovered that yellow fever actually spread by mosquitoes. Nobody had known that. Amazingly, Spanish-American War, so many Americans died from disease. That he had studied and realized it was the mosquitoes that was spreading it. So he had Dr. William Gorges. He is going to come in and say, hey, cut down all vegetation, all these trees and stuff that hold water, and the water itself, spray it with oil. And what that's going to do is kill the mosquito eggs, because mosquitoes lay eggs on top of water. with oil sprayed on top of water. It will kill the eggs and keep mosquitoes from being able to lay. And if you can lay, it'll kill the eggs dramatically. And essentially, yellow fever, instead of killing 5,000 a month, it reduces numbers greatly. Yellow fever does exist. There's still some mosquitoes. And this does cost thousands of lives, $400 million. Takes 10 years, but 10 miles of canal will be made through the Panama. Uh, will create the Panama Canal, and it's going to change everything for the United States. And we'll hold on to that. We actually won't give it back to Panama until the 1970s, actually. So he titled Roosevelt as president and one of his policies, or his policy toward helping Panama get independence so we can build the canal. This is very typical of Roosevelt. When asked his foreign policy, it was speak softly, carry a big stick. The reason he said that, he meant it was a metaphor, and it's not a dirty metaphor. Don't think of it like that. But his big stick policy was his idea that, hey, I'm not going to talk a lot of mess, but I have a big stick to beat you over the head with, like a weapon. In this case, his weapon actually was the U.S. Navy. I mean, you got to understand, the U.S. Navy had gotten so strong in the Spanish-American War. When Roosevelt was president, he builds it up. Remember, he believed Mahon's book. He read it, and it was a general agreement that, hey, we need a strong Navy if we're going to be a strong country. He actually builds up so much, has his new ships painted bright white, takes the Navy, U.S. Navy, around the world. He's going to send them around the world to show off how great our Navy is. So any little country sitting off the side and they say, what's that in the background? What's all those ships are huge or massive? What are those? That's the U.S. Navy. Don't mess with us. That was his theory. And he put it to test. Panama Canal was one example, right? But he also made it clear to European powers. See, if you guys remember the Monroe Doctrine, if you know that from past history classes, the Monroe Doctrine is pretty much told European powers you can't colonize, no more new territories, stay out of our half of the world, essentially. A corollary is just an addition to official statements. So we're going to call this Roosevelt Corollary. That said, the U.S. will be the police power on this side of the world. We will be an international police force. We'll take care of everything in North and South America. So it took the Monroe Doctrine that said, hey, you guys stay out of here, no more new territories, to complete saying, you guys stay out of here, period. You got a problem, we'll solve it. And that came up because Britain, or England at the time, had loaned money to a South American country, and the South American country had failed to pay that loan back. And Great Britain had threatened to invade in order to make up for that compensation. And we couldn't have that. We couldn't have Europeans coming over here. It would have just spread like wildfire. It would have got worse. So that was Roosevelt's corollary added to Monroe Doctrine that said, we're the police power, we'll take over it. You got problems over here, go through us. Even if it means we pay the debt and absorb it, we'll pay it. We'll go down there and take care of it ourselves. We'd rather do that than have you guys come over. And so you can actually look at these pictures. Look at this first one. Obviously, the U.S., Teddy Roosevelt is a police. Our big stick now, our police stick is called a new diplomacy. And we're going to be the bridge, the United States, us, between these European powers and South America. We're the ones that's going to police and get things done in between them, not anybody else. This is a Roosevelt administration, if you will. And other cartoons like this one, you can see this one. This is a Caribbean island. See Teddy walking around. Big stick policy, right? And he's got his toy is the U.S. Navy. From the receiver, the sheriff, the debt collector. You can see the names of all these things. And the Caribbean Sea knows we're the big stick in the Caribbean. Nobody's going to mess with us. He made that clear to the whole world. When he added the Roosevelt Corollary to Monroe Doctrine, essentially was a perfect example of his big stick policy, just like what he did with Panama. So since we're sticking with foreign issues here, we're going to transfer away from Teddy and talk about his successor, which was Taft. You guys remember him? Big guy, gets stuck in the White House bathtub. In the last sections, we talked about him with domestic issues, how he screwed up everything that Teddy wanted, from conservation to everything. He messed up everything. This was one of the things he actually messed up. This cartoon actually shows pretty much Teddy looking in the window, see how things are going with Taft. It doesn't look too good. Taft is doing pretty bad here, and this is the White House. He's actually getting the yarn. Everything's tangled up. Taft, big chubby guy as president's not cutting it. You remember that from last chapter, how Teddy had came back. Well, when Teddy had left, Taft also changed foreign policy a little bit as well. Taft had try to go the economic route with business. And he called this dollar diplomacy. But what it was, it encouraged American companies to invest in Latin America, buy plantations, or make loans. If those countries can't pay back those loans, or if they can't pay us back accordingly, don't worry about it. The U.S. Army will actually go in and occupy the country until they pay us back. And that happened. Nicaragua was a perfect example. U.S. Marines were sent there in 1912 when they failed to pay back a loan and didn't leave until 1933. So we're going to use that excuse to go to other countries, take over, but we don't leave. And the only reason they left in 1933 was FDR's president during the Depression said, we can't afford this. We got to bring these guys home. So you can see the Marines here. That is why a lot of Latin Americans don't trust America with our history. And we've gone down there and we've stayed, even unwelcomely, quite a bit. All right, last slide, wrapping everything up. The last part we need to talk about is actually history with Mexico. Pancho Villa was actually one of several rebels at this point in time throughout Mexico. Mexico has had a rocky history with the government. At this point, they were on their 45th president, and their history is much shorter in the United States. They've gone through quite a few problems. At this point in time, it's actually a revolution taking place in Mexico, and eventually it would be like a three-way revolution. It's actually pretty complicated and interesting. In the north, the hero was actually this man, Pancho Villa. Americans actually loved him at first. There's actually a movie, there's a film footage of him fighting for his people in a revolution against a corrupt government because America loved him so much that Hollywood films actually went down there. You can look this movie up. Antonio Banderas is Pancho Villa, and it's called Pancho Villa as himself. And essentially, these Hollywood films, this guy was like the George Washington. Everybody was excited for him. He was fighting for independence. He was fighting for peasants. He was fighting for the poor people. So everybody actually loved him in America. Woodrow Wilson is not making official statements at the time. He's not saying Pancho Villa is the new leader or Zapata or anybody like that. He's actually taking pretty much a step back, not actually taking a particular stand on it. He's waiting. Watchful waiting is what we're going to call it. He's waiting for it to play out and see what side he should take. Things actually get pretty bad. Pancho Villa is having difficulties financing. And this is after Hollywood came, filmed him, and he made some money, but not that much. This was much deeper into the revolution. He's having problems. He's actually going to have a band. His guys are actually going to invade Texas, a town, and actually murder some Americans right there on the border. And then they go back to Mexico. Obviously, that's how desperate things are for him. Woodrow Wilson decides to send General John Pershing. And he is actually going to go after Pancho Villa. He'll go deep in Mexico. No declaration of war, just chase after Pancho Villa. They take advantage of Mexico being so lawlessness at the time and not a strong government whatsoever. But he never catches Pancho Villa. It's kind of funny when you think about it. He goes deep, deep, almost to Mexico City, chasing trying to find Pancho Villa with a whole army, a small army and everything. Pancho Villa avoids him just like he does the Mexican government. It's pretty hilarious. But Pershing eventually gets called back because he gets a telegraph that says, "How well do you speak French?" And that's because Pershing will be ahead of the commanders in the Great War, also known as World War I. But that's actually why he gives up on chasing Pancho Villa. I like this picture. You guys should look this up. There's actually one general and Pancho Villa, and this is Pershing when they were friends. For a period of time, Americans really liked Pancho Villa and his belief system. Supposedly, this guy right here is Patton, General Patton, which we're talking about World War II when he was a young guy in World War I. Just another soldier, but can't confirm that. Still can't confirm that to this day. I've been trying for years, but I just get hypothetical. Supposedly, nobody can tell me for sure. We know Patton was there, but we don't know if that's him. But nonetheless, this is actually a funny business poster that's been printed quite a bit, but it's before Pancho Villa becomes an outlaw to Americans and everywhere else. And of course, our next chapter goes into World War I, where we'll pick this up.